Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey Kerr. I'm here today with a very special guest. He spent over 20 years blending the worlds of talent agency and psychology. As a talent agent, he's worked with actors to overcome personal roadblocks, while his background in psychology gives him a unique perspective on helping creatives reach their full potential. Furthermore, he teaches creatives how to use AI tools like ChatGPT and Claude for content creation. Please welcome Albert Bramante.
Well, hello, and thank you again for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I am very happy to have you. So, to start things off, how did you first get started in the industry?
So I started about 21 years ago, as an agent, and suddenly before that, I was, did a brief stint as a performer myself, but realized, as much as I love actors, performing wasn't really for me, but I enjoyed being around actors, and I enjoyed the energy around actors, the creative energy. And for me, that was exciting. Being around, just being around the energy of actors, creatives, directors, filmmakers. So for me, it was like a natural progression to just start going more behind the scenes. And so I would help with casting in the beginning. I sometimes would help with putting stuff together, bringing people together. And I realized I love connecting people. So I was like, it kind of goes hand in hand with, well, maybe now I can, be an agent or or manage actors in a sense and connect them to different roles and different opportunities. And that's how I started.
And when it comes to securing clients, what do you usually look for in a talent?
What do I look for? Well, number one is, of course, some sort of ability, talent ability. So talent, I would say number one. Second thing I look for is passion. If you're going to work, especially in this industry, you have to have passion. You have to have drive, ambition, and just an overall love for the work. That's something that's important. And the third thing that I look for is a business, intelligence or business sense, because this is even if you're acting and this is all entertainment, this is still show business. So I need to see a business sort of perspective in a sense.
And of all the actors you've been signed with throughout your career, would you mind naming any who've been the most successful?
I do work with actors. Use her first name for privacy reasons, but her Juliana, and I can't take credit for her current success trajectory at the moment, but I was able to get her first couple of TV co-star roles, and now she's a series regular on Law and Order SVU. She had went to school to Lambda, and then went to, became a very well-known actor, and then now I'm not able to take credit for her SVU success because that was another agent, but I started her in the line, and I would say that's a major success. I've always been rooting for her. I also booked, another client, Shelby, on her first Broadway contract of 1776, and it's a national tour of that. That was another success story there. And then I booked another actress by the name of Mel Khalil, who became a series regular on a new Apple show, City on Fire. Unfortunately, I only lasted one season, but she was a series regular on that show. So those are my success stories, and I'm always evolving. I'm more of a boutique agency, so I don't necessarily really represent A-listers, or I like to say I represent future A-listers in a sense. So that is sort of like what I do. I'm more of the, I book a lot of people like on the bit parts that you'll see sometimes in an episode of Law and Order or FBI, the lawyer, the vendor, the waitress, where they have speaking roles in those shows. So that's what I do a lot of.
Oh, so you're basically an agent for character actors.
Yes, I pride myself. I love character actors more so than traditional Hollywood cookie cutters, especially gritty character actors in a sense.
Well, yeah. I mean, after all, there's probably arguably a lot more of them than there are A-listers, and well, they don't get the credit they deserve.
Of course, and they're actually the ones that are really driving the story. The movie or the TV show. They're the ones really driving that.
And in the past, there have been many open casting calls for major projects, allowing actors with no agents to audition. Yet in the end, the powers that be end up casting those who are already signed. What's your take on the subject?
Well, sometimes they will have an offer already out to like an A-lister, and then what they might want to do is in case that person turns it down, they have options. Also, they even though they might be doing an open casting call for a particular project, they may be looking also to use whatever they get from the casting call to fill the smaller roles too. So like maybe again they're going to need the waitress, they might need the nurse, the doctor in the scene. They may get their actors from those roles from the open call. So you may not land a lead role, but maybe you'll land a few lines in the project, which is still a good thing for an actor who doesn't have representation.
Well, yeah, and in fact, I've heard a prolific film producer named David Valdez mention once that it's actually harder to, cast a movie with, well, I guess this would also apply to stage or any project with actors. It's much harder to cast a movie with not many speaking parts than it is to cast a movie with a ton of speaking parts. And well, I can see why, because, if, an actor's open to really any role, well, there may not be enough for them to get cast in.
Right, and that's just a limitation of the entire business is that there's an oversaturated actors and very limited number of roles. Usually, the latest statistic I've been hearing is that maybe only 2 or 3% of all actors are working at the moment. And then that kind of leaves another 97% not working, which is not the most sobering statistic to hear.
We've also seen instances where actors score big success at such a young age, like starring in a big blockbuster hit and or winning an Oscar, but their careers go downhill shortly thereafter. And whenever something like that happens, critics and or audiences feel the actor either needs a serious sit down with their agents or get a brand new one. From your perspective, why do you think it's hard for successful young actors to avoid such a rough follow-up?
Well, it depends, and you brought up a good point with that is that just because you get cast, like let's say in a TV show, like with my client that one time in the Apple show, you could do it such a great job, and even though initially when an actor signs on for a series regular role on a TV show, you sign for a multi-year contract. Usually, in my case, we had signed a 6-year deal. Unfortunately, if the show gets canceled for one season, there's nothing that deal is done. So, and a lot of times that can happen. I another one of my Asian colleagues, represent an actor who's been on 3 different shows as a series regular and is still needing to bartend, to help pay the bill. So it's great when you hit that, when you land that role and that you get that so-called big break. But at the same time, this is why you need to keep your skill set sharp because it can change. You could be working one year and the next year be out of work as an actor. And that's why you need that resilience in a sense to be able to, look for work again and to withstand all of that. Because again, it's unpredictable. Even now, I talk about TV shows canceling, but even Broadway shows have canceled too because they lose funding or the ticket sales don't go, they'll go at launch. And then 2 months later, they're not doing well ticket sales, why they close early. Or a film, for example, you could spend a lot of money on a film and it doesn't do well in the theater and it's out of theaters in a week or two. There's a lot of stuff that's not in the actor's control, but they should plan for these opportunities, unfortunately, to happen.
Well, yeah, and you also, everything you mentioned is perfectly summarizes why show business is a tough business to be in.
It really is, and but it's also exciting. I don't want to sit here and say like, oh, it's doom and gloom. I don't want to sound like doom and gloom here because it is exciting. However, realistically, it's not the easiest business to be in, and what I tell, especially young grads or young actors that are just coming out of college for acting, or or conservatory, is to have a 20-year plan. This is not a sprint. It's going to be a long-term process, and to be ready for that. Have a plan.
In fact, I've also heard, Tim Johnson, who's this veteran animation director at DreamWorks, he said something like, I love making movies, but I just hate releasing them, which, he's winning about how, making a movie can be
Hmm.
stressful but rewarding at the same time, while releasing it can be stressful and painful at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Because now it's like the moment of truth comes in. Especially when you have people that investors who or producers who invested a lot of money into the product, they're going to expect to want to see a return at least or some sort of recoup of their investment. And if they're not going to get that, that's going to get frustrating too. Because a lot of times, especially when you're putting a movie together, it could take, a month or even a year or two to plan. And yet, the movie theater goer, the average movie theater goer, is just going to see it for the hour, hour and a half, and then, for the critic, and then review it.
As I mentioned earlier, you happen to have a background in psychology. When did you realize you could use that as a talent agent?
Well, when I first started, I already had my master's degree in psychology. And I decided, while I was, doing the agent thing, to finish the degree because, in order to really work as a psychologist or any type of, work in this field, you need a PhD. So I was like, I'm just going to do it. And then what I did for my deep thesis or dissertation, which is a monumental project in itself, I looked at why do actors self-sabotage? Because one of the things that I was running into when I first started, back in the mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006, I was noticing a lot of actors were self-sabotaging. They were not preparing well. It was, they would go through, they would no show on auditions. So it was something that really I guess stressed me out because I was like, I don't understand what's going on. Their words are telling me they want to work, they really want to audition, and yet I'm having these opportunities now and they're not doing it. And so that's where I bridged the gap with like, okay, I did my doctoral thesis on this. Why is this happening? And that's why, to answer your question, that's where I, knew I can bridge the gap between the two of them.
And as I also mentioned, you worked with actors to overcome personal roadblocks and help them reach their full potential. How have you managed to do so?
The one thing is to work on their mindsets, cultivating a growth mindset, which is about, developing resiliency. So reframing, a couple things that you can do. You can reframe failure as feedback. So there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. Even if you don't do a great audition, you can take the information you learned from that and move on from that, and adapt to it and grow from it. Another, aspect is to not take things personal. I hear a lot of people tell me, "Oh, I wish I could be an actor, but there's so much rejection." I don't look at it that way. I don't see it that way because it's not personal. There are hundreds of actors sometimes trying out for one role. Only one person can get it. You're not rejected. It's not personal. It just didn't go your way. So what I often, reframe it as there's no such thing as rejection. Your services are not needed today. That's really all that's, at play here. There's no such thing as rejection. Your services are not needed today. That's all it is. But they may be needed tomorrow. So this is why the important thing is as soon as the audition is over, let it go. Your focus should then be on where's your next audition and work on that.
And you also teach creatives how to use AI tools. What inspired you to do so?
Well, I've always been, curious. I've always had a curious mind. I love to read. I love to engage in new pursuits. And then, I would say this time 2 years ago, exactly, everyone was talking about this new tool, ChatGPT. It was like at that time really new. And I was a little skeptical and hesitant. Because I didn't know what it was. And then I started playing around with it. And I'm like, it was the outputs it was giving me was amazing. So what I often do is a tool for research, a tool for brainstorming. I use it as. I will say as much as I like, teaching AI and using AI. There's part of it that's about using it responsibly, and ethically. That's important to me. I don't think, and I don't recommend anyone to just cut and paste what you get the first time around and pull it off as your work because your audience is going to know automatically this is not your voice. It's so robotic and it's inauthentic. So what I often say to do is to go back and forth with it. Write something up. You do your own notes because it's your whatever article or whatever thing you're writing should be from you and not a robot in a sense. What I might do is I'll write something and then I'll say proofread it or is there anything I'm not thinking of, and I'll share the writing piece and then they'll give me another generation and then I'll take that and I'll go through it and change, again, put my own voice, put my own thoughts in there. So I think it rather than saying AI generated content, it should be AI assisted content. assistance only because, it's not going to write like you. I mean, you could start to train it to write by you. So one thing, if any of your listeners are into, if any listeners here are interested in learning how to get ChatGPT to sound like you, take a couple of pieces of writing that you wrote a few years ago and put it through ChatGPT and say, please analyze my writing for tone, structure, language and all that, and any subtleties in the language. And then it will come back with a list. Then you could go to your custom instructions to ChatGPT and say, and then cut and paste that information that gave you analysis of your writing. So now it's still not going to be perfect, but it's going to sound more like you than a robot. And then you still have to tweak it, you still have to proofread, you still have to edit yourself. Because again, it's not a perfect or it's a good tool to use. So it's good for like social media posts if you need to like write a couple social media posts. A lot of times if I'm doing it, something I want to create content based on an article I'll post feed the article to ChatGPT and say, please give me 10 ideas for the brainstorm. And then I'll take the one I like and then I'll brainstorm myself and then I might do another reiteration, say, please clean this up a little bit more, keep the same thoughts intact. It's just helping me and strengthen my writing rather than doing it for me. Because when you have AI do it for you, it's not going to sound like you at all.
Well, yeah, I've seen, I come across a couple movie reviews, and the reviewers saying this movie is clearly written by AI, or at least feels like it anyway.
Yeah, because there's not going to be that connection. And that's why I'm not necessarily worried about AI taking the jobs away because you still need that human behind it to program it and to, feed it if you're going to use it. So what I feel in a sense is it's not so much that AI is going to take our jobs away. It's about the younger people who don't know anything about AI, don't want to learn about AI. Because then you're going to have people who do have the AI experience that are going to be getting most of their jobs. It's not to be afraid of. The AI is not going to, in my opinion, going to take away jobs. Now, it may make things harder because now you may not necessarily need to hire a social media coordinator or pay as much because, all you have to do is put into ChatGPT about that you want to create a social media calendar and they'll give you some great ideas.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of discussion on the pros and cons of artificial intelligence. I mean, the film and TV industry famously went through strikes among screenwriters and actors 2 years ago
Yeah.
regarding the use of it. Where do you stand on AI?
So where do I stand on that? As a personal person, I definitely am very fascinated with AI. I am a little worried though about, especially in the voiceover industry, because now you have a lot of apps and programs in AI that create AI generated voices. I'm not too terribly concerned yet about actors being replaced because again, the video generating tools are not entirely perfect yet. And again, you still need to have writers behind it to really give the people personality. So I'm not worried about that. I am concerned again for the voiceover world, and I do think that the unions have to put more protections in there.
As prices for everything becomes more expensive every year, studios have been looking into using AI as a way to make things more cost effective. Yet one of many problems there is that it'd be taking jobs away from people who've been making movies their whole lives. I mean, James Cameron has said that big budget films can only survive if they cut the cost of VFX in half, and he's also trying to figure out how AI might help out with that without replacing crew members. Do you think filmmakers will eventually find a way?
I would think so. I mean, because again, even adding CGI and computer graphics, like you don't know, normally you don't have to blow things up literally to create an explosion, a realistic explosion, in a movie. I think we're gonna see more faster automated functions, but still you need that human connection to tell that story. You can't just rely on other people.
Although recently, President Trump has claimed that he'll place a 100% tariff on all films produced outside of America that are brought into the country because he wants them made in the United States again. Now, this has left a lot of people very frustrated. What are your thoughts on the whole ordeal?
Yeah, it really depends on what your politics are. I'm not entirely. I know he was trying to get more movies made here, and the one reality is a lot of movies are going abroad. Which is taking away the work from the people here.
Well,
Because unless you can afford a flight and stay abroad, it's going to be tough. To do any work. I do know that there's a lot of films that are going elsewhere. How much, I don't know.
Key reason for that as well, because it's, less expensive to shoot out of the country.
It is. It's like much less expensive, and there's sometimes tax breaks. And there's also great landscaping that can be used too.
And for those who'd like to pursue a career in the industry, where do you think would be a good place to start?
Well, the first thing I would do is do an internship. Well, I would say before that, first figure out where do you want to go. There's so many avenues in this profession. But then I would definitely say do an internship at first. See the work up front, and then that'll help you make your decision. If it's something you want to pursue. Some people love it. Some people are really shocked to see how hard it can be.
Before we go, do you have any other upcoming projects that you'd like to share with us?
No, but I would like to just mention my book, which is called "Rise Above the Script: Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists." It's available on Amazon, Kindle, and audiobook.
Oh, is there any more you can tell us about it?
So the book came out in 2024, and even though it's geared towards actors, it can apply to anybody who's dealing with self-doubt and mastering self-sabotage. So I talk about some of the reasons why people self-sabotage, sometimes some good, prescriptive remedies to do that. What I mean by is like, creating a calendar, for instance, a planner, and write everything down, because once it's there, it's in front of you, and you have to get it done. And this way you don't, sort of procrastinate. The important thing with that is resiliency. So what I was saying, because I didn't know if you wanted to say anything, was that you needed things to move forward. So you need resilience, a lot of patience. So if you want to go into this field, regardless, I would say, like I said, start off with the internship and then see and experiment with various different ways too. I started, as an actor myself, then I went to casting, and then I volunteered at film festivals. So take advantage of a lot of different things and opportunities and see what really speaks to you, and of course, this is going to sound cliche, but it's true. This is not about for the money. But so do what feeds your soul and what makes you really feel important.
Well, yeah, you should never take these jobs just for money alone because otherwise you'd just be phoning it in.
And you're not going to be putting your full foot forward, your most authentic self when you do that, and it'll show in your quality of your work. But I'm just saying, I would definitely go in with the notion this is exciting, but this is also going to be challenging. This is something that may not be comfortable all the time. It's going to feel
Oh,
great when you're doing it, but may not be comfortable 100% of the time.
in fact, I don't know if you've read Barry Sonnenfeld's recent book, but he mentioned in it, three major bullet points for him to say yes to a project. And it's important if it takes off at least two of them, which are the salary, location, and the script.
Yeah. And especially if you're going to work on a film, I think having a script is important. And that's one thing require. Like if a client gets offered a part in a film, I want to see the script, and I think it's important for them to see the script entirely before making a commitment of yes or no, because it may not work for you. Because I have some clients that or opposed to certain ideas and don't want to be involved in those.
Albert, I thank you very much for devoting your time to this conversation. It was great getting to talk to you.
Yes, it was great, Jeffrey. Thank you again for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, and for those who'd like to keep up with your career, where can people find you on the internet?
So you can go to albertbramante.com. You can also go on LinkedIn under Albert Bramante. You can also follow me on Instagram at Dr. Al Bramante. And of course, if you are interested in the book, it's available, like I said, on Amazon, paperback, Kindle, or audiobook.
Thanks again for joining me today, Albert. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me.